Welcome to the Experts in Sport podcast, brought to you by the School of Sport, Exercise and Health Sciences at Loughborough University. Today I'm with Professor Aaron Smith from Loughborough University and Ben Shields from MIT, and we're going to talk about the Metaverse and sport. Firstly, we'll discuss what exactly the Metaverse is before we dig deeper into Aaron and Ben's ideas of how the Metaverse may impact the future of sport. But before we begin our discussion on the Metaverse and its potential impacts, can you two provide us with a brief background into yourselves? So starting with yourself, Ben.
Yes, Martin, great to be with you, and same with you, Aaron, as well. I am a senior lecturer at the MIT Sloan School of Management. I have, for the better part of the last 20 years, been focused on the impact of the internet on the sports fan experience and business models in the sports industry. And that has ranged from online communities in the early 2000s to social media, which is a fascinating topic in and of itself. And part of my professional background was I spent some time at ESPN, where I helped them build a social media strategy and implement it. And now I've been at MIT exploring similar questions of what the impact of the internet and related digital technologies are on the sports fan experience and business models in sports. So that's one of the reasons why I'm really excited to have this conversation with the two of you today.
Brilliant. Thanks for coming on. And Aaron, over to yourself.
Thanks, Martin. Thanks, Ben. I'm Aaron Smith. I'm a professor of sport business and innovation at Loughborough University, London, and director of the Institute for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. My research primarily works at the intersection of what I'd describe as two sets of domains. The first set is money and meaning, in the sense that obviously there's a breathtaking amount of money associated with sport. And there is, precisely because it means so much to so many. And the second set is around brains and brands, as it were. That is both human brains and AI ones, and how those brains interact with sport properties in the sense of brands that have taken residence in them, at least in the human ones, and are programmed in the AI ones. So in a way, I'm interested in how sports' social and economic dimensions, as if you like, collided, and how sports transformed from its origins as a kind of idealized amateurist pursuit to what we see now as in what Ben's described almost as a hyper-commercial juggernaut. So at the same time, I try and explain how sport fans think and why they display a loyalty to their teams and clubs and why that's virtually unmatched. And again, a bit like Ben, increasingly at the confluence of those four domains, all these technological enablers, and I guess more pertinent to our current conversation, they're all kind of digital disruptors. Although when it comes to the metaverse, I'm inclined to think that disruption is an inadequate descriptor. We'll get to that in a moment. Maybe radical revolution is the way to go, but we'll talk about that shortly, Martin.
Thanks, Aaron. Great introduction. And it is really great to have you both on. I've had brief conversation with you both around the metaverse. And I think it'd be amazing to see you both converse and join together on some of these conversations. And I've checked this bit out before we came on. So I did want to, from a brand perspective, it's amazing that we've got you guys on because we've got Ben, who, according to the QS rankings, is the number one university in the world. And we have Aaron on from Loughborough, who is the number one sports university in the world. So combining your knowledge and the brands of MIT and Loughborough, we should have some of the perfect answers to the sport metaverse. No pressure. I know we talked about that before. So we're going to dig straight in, and I'm going to ask you a very simple or not so simple question of what is the metaverse? Who wants to go first?
I'm happy to leap in if you like, Martin, and I'll leave Ben to clean up my mess in a moment. When I think about the metaverse, I'm reminded of the film The Matrix, and with apologies to some of your listeners who may be from a generation that don't know what The Matrix is, but one of the two major characters, Morpheus, talks to Neo about the Matrix and says, basically, unfortunately, no one can be told what the Matrix is. You have to see it for yourself. And I think about that a little bit because the metaverse, it's a theory at the moment. It's a possibility. You might call it a dream to some, a glint in Zuckerberg's eye, a prediction for us, but it isn't something that's uniformly defined yet. although I would say in some form it is inevitable. So let me put it this way, and I'll define it. Maybe I can use the term Sportiverse because I see it as a kind of digital ecosystem of augmented and virtual reality. It's where users can experience, I think, three things. And I put it this way. The three things are you can experience real sport. Second, you can experience hyper-real sport. And third, you can experience what I'm going to call unreal sport. So by real sport, I mean you can watch a game from the stands, a real game, and just be part of a general kind of immersive experience that is a relative facsimile of the actual game. Second, you can have a hyper-real experience, which might be augmented. It could be a bit more immersive. It could be a bit like, and I'm thinking or musing out loud that it might be something like watching Australia win the Women's World Cup of football from the first-person perspective of Sam Kerr's digital lens or contact lens. Or third, it could be completely unreal. And in that respect, it could be, quite fantastical. Like, for example, maybe you'd like to have a go at Quidditch in the Metaverse or in the Sportiverse. But I'm thinking it's also about the opportunity to, box Ali, drive a Formula One car at Monaco, face a Michael Holding delivery, or maybe you just want to serve for a championship against Serena. But for others, I think it'll be something like free soloing the Dawn Wall at El Capitan, or maybe even just doing your Peloton workout as a Tour de France stage. If I could sort of boil it down to a kind of even more frugal definition, I'd say that the Sportiverse is a kind of digital constellation of sport experiences for analog sport fans, digital experiences for analog fans. And I say analog without tongue-in-cheek because it's a reference to human agents, and I think there will undoubtedly be a very heavy non-human AI presence in the Sportiverse. So we're talking about something that is really going to allow us to redefine our own sport participation, our training, our fan truths, be first-person immersive. So we're making a transition from what is presently a 2D internet to a 3D immersive universe. It's real, hyper-real, or unreal, as I've noted. I think it's smart, it's personalized. It's supposed to be interoperable and integrated. That means that we can move between it with different components and maintain our identities, and that even in some cases, given we'll be talking about a business model shortly, our values and our currencies, whatever they might be, maybe in NFTs, and they'll be critically enabled, I think, through a whole suite of what we're loosely calling, I think, Web 3.0. So, we've moved into kind of fourth wave of computing power. We've gone from the original mainframe hardware to personal computing to the cloud and mobile, and now we're at Web 3.0. I don't want to steal Ben's thunder, but I've heard him call the Metaverse an inflection point, and I think that's true. We're talking about, in some ways, a kind of parallel plane of existence from a sporting viewpoint. It is unrealized, but there are some nascent signs that it's underway as well. And perhaps I'll let Ben respond before we talk about some of the early forays into what we might call the Metaverse, if that's all right with you, Martin.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. You've given both a simple and a complex answer there. So we are going to pass over to Ben to see what he can clean up and what he can do with that. So over to you, Ben.
Not much cleaning here. I think what Aaron has done has, first of all, painted a really exciting picture of the possibilities of what he's coining as the Sportiverse. For me, I have been drawn to this conversation about the Metaverse because it is a bit of a buzzword. We have Mark Zuckerberg in part to blame for that buzzwordification of this concept. And really, over the last couple of years, we've heard a number of different visions and definitions for what the Metaverse is or what it could become. For me, I think I have a bias towards simplicity, just like Aaron does here, which is I have, with my colleagues, been describing the Metaverse as digital environments that have three characteristics. One is they are immersive. It makes you feel like you are in that environment. The second characteristic is it is unscripted. That just like real life, I walk outside my door and I don't really know what's going to happen. And when you walk into a digital environment, it's critical in this context that it is unscripted. And then the third characteristic is that it is interactive. You have the ability to connect and communicate with others in these digital environments. And I think those characteristics are specific enough to clearly delineate the metaverse from, say, things like social media. Social media obviously is interactive. There is some unscripted element to it, but I'm not sure we're there yet today on it being 100% immersive, right? When we open up our TikTok or our Twitter, do we feel like we're going to another place? Not quite sure yet. These three characteristics I also think make the metaverse distinct from gaming. Gaming, of course, is a little bit more immersive and interactive, but at least to date, most games are not unscripted. So I think it gives us a bit of a framework, but also it is not too prescriptive. And I think that's where it gets really exciting, because we have heard one vision of the metaverse articulated by Mark Zuckerberg, but I'm not so sure that is going to be the vision that becomes a reality. And in the end, I think what's going to be fascinating is we've got to focus on what is going to improve both the fan experience via these metaverse technologies, as well as what's going to improve the athlete experience. And if we stay focused on the users of these types of environments and technologies, then that starts to open up an amazing set of possibilities of how this world will evolve based on some of the initial ideas that Aaron had put on the table. So I think we just need to widen the aperture a little bit about what the metaverse could be and stay focused on some of the key stakeholders and what their needs are. And then it starts to get really exciting.
I really like that, Ben. The interesting part of the interactive, unscripted, immersive, I think that makes it clear, probably hopefully to all our listeners. And Aaron, from your description there of the Matrix, that certainly made it clear to me. So any listener who's not watched the Matrix, go and watch it. You'll understand things a little bit more. The next bit really to talk about is kind of how it already has evolved and where it's evolving to. Interestingly, you mentioned Mark Zuckerberg. And obviously recently Apple have launched their, I think it's called Apple Vision Pro. And I know Google had Google Glasses. And the Apple Vision Pro in particular recently, I instantly thought about the Matrix. So it'd be interesting to get your guys' ideas potentially around that, around kind of Apple Vision Pro, where that sits. And also with the evolution, transformation, and I think, Aaron, you mentioned radical revolution earlier, kind of where are we now and how might this explode into our kind of futures?
Let me address one part of that first. Where are we now? That might be the interesting segue. I think the metaverse or Sportiverse doesn't exist in any real way, not based on the kind of conditions that both Ben and I have specified. But there are some interesting forays into the area, and some, perhaps more interestingly, some promises and declarations about where sport organisations in particular are going. We know that clubs like Manchester City have promised that they'll digitise their stadium. United have said they'll create a digital universe especially for their merchandise. We know the NBA's gone in. There's a couple of Major League Baseball teams that are playing in the space. Google's working with NBA on digitising arenas. These are areas in which there's some pretty interesting developments going on. I think in particular also we've seen a couple of areas in which there's been a couple of perhaps nascent and not all that successful attempts at broadcasting. Australian Open had a go at it last year with some broadcasting using a couple hundred cameras around Melbourne Park. Formula One had a go during COVID in particular, and trying to integrate it into a gamified e-sport kind of experience. But I think the real game changer can be seen around what's being done with Nike. I don't know if you're familiar with Nike Land, but they've got their own branded virtual world on Roblox, which is a sort of self-described metaverse-enabled video platform. And it allows you to go into the Nike headquarters, try on shoes, play a few games, maybe use the accelerometers in your mobile phone or mobile devices, and play some real-world games. But there's a gamification element as well. And then, of course, the back end of it, we're moving towards the digitization of currency and NFTs. So Nike have bought a company that works around what they call, I think, metaverse-ready sneakers and collectibles. So you can see them selling sneakers for your avatars, and you can see where that's going in terms of its business model. In terms of the next part of your question was really, I think, about how will it evolve or develop? And there's clearly going to be some technological rate limiting factors here. And you mentioned the wearables, for example. But the componentry like the headsets are not just the only limiting factor, especially around the interoperability, the movement between different metaverses or multiverses, as it were, especially given the decentralized ownership of the metaverse as promised through blockchain. So there's a lot of different technological elements that really need to come together, and we're a relatively long way away from that. I'm thinking about things, like, obviously there's artificial intelligence that's going to create the avatars, the digital humans that we're going to play against. There's a kind of Internet of Things that's going to have to be in place as well, in case you or I, we might want to use our real tennis racket and have that somehow digitized and connect to the sporting or the Sportiverse that we're involved in. There's the wearables that you've talked about, like with the AR and VR. There's the blockchain at the back end. There's all the spatial computing that goes along with it, and digital twinning, that is being able to capture an environment that's plausible and immersive and has haptic technology, that is physical feedback mechanisms. And ultimately, maybe, the wearables transform into something that is not just augmented like glasses or digital contact lens, but, literally as part of a modified human experience, embedded surgically or otherwise into our bodies, and to enable permanent connection with the Sportiverse or Metaverse. I think that one of the interesting areas will be to look at exactly where sport moves in terms of its connection to the Sportiverse, and how it looks to engage. And I guess that goes to the third part of your question. And I think we can expect that we'll see a whole suite of virtual sporting events and platforms, simulations of traditional sports, like Ben was talking about. I mentioned the virtual stadiums and arenas. I mentioned the avatars, their customization. We're undoubtedly all going to become, armchair avatars and, wearable warriors, in the end. And that will allow us to train and develop skills. It could be coaching, it could be analytics, or it could just be for recreation. At the same time, then, you've got all of the social and community opportunities for sport fans to connect and engage in, maybe non-specific sport ways. Then there's all the business behind it, around sponsorship, advertising. And here we've got a whole new digitized space that no one necessarily owns. So who's going to own all this space? Who owns the billboards? How will the branded experience be transferred to the individual? Will they be entirely customized? And of course, there's all the fantasy sports and betting that goes on behind it. So, we're talking about an enormous potential for a cross-reality integration. I like Ben's conceptualization of this in terms of it being unscripted, because I think that goes to the heart of what we're talking about here in terms of what I'm loosely calling a cross-reality integration, where you can take aspects of the physical world, or you can enhance real-world sporting experiences, or you could augment them, or you could play against existing athletes, you can play against AI athletes, you can communicate with fans, and you can probably buy all kinds of products and services. So again, this parallel universe of unprecedented opportunity. The catch in the back end of this is really going to be who's going to have access, how's it going to be managed, and will it be completely fragmented, or will it be integrated in some meaningful way?
Aaron, thanks. You've touched on many things around the evolution, where we are and where things are going, and started to touch upon sport. Ben, I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that, or whether you'd like to kind of add some depth to any sports who may be leading the way in this space, and where we've seen things, and where you may predict things might go.
The only point that I wanted to emphasize, because I think it's such a critical one that Aaron made, is that there could be a variety of entry points into this digitally immersive, unscripted, interactive environment in the future. And right now, today in 2023, the headset is our primary entry point. But as we've seen, there are a lot of challenges with VR headsets. And even the mixed reality headset that Apple has recently introduced is, I don't think, the solution for mainstream wide adoption. So there are going to be, over the course of the next 5, 10, 20 years, some innovations in entry points into these digital environments that we're going to have to monitor and pay attention to. Just thought that was really important to emphasize. As for some examples that start to illustrate what's possible, I personally have been struck by the newer concept of the F1 arcade, where you can go as a F1 fan to a physical space and experience through a simulator what it's like to drive around F1 tracks. And to me, that opens up a lot of interesting possibilities in this blended physical and digital world. You could, of course, imagine that if you get really good at these simulators, like we've seen in the past with some current professional F1 drivers, you could perhaps move up the ranks and get a shot to actually get in a real car. That, I think, just scratches the surface of what these physical, digital environments that put people not only in a spectator role, you're a fan of the sport, but also allows them to participate. And I think F1 is going to be continuing to lead the way there in that particular space.
And you mentioned F1 and using simulators and things, and that's obviously a sport that exists that might modify into different ways of working. I think with drone racing, I think they have something similar with computer games and people playing games and picking up on people from there that then might go into the professional sport of drone racing. Can you guys shed any light on that? I'm far removed from this. It's kind of something that I know and kind of have heard, but is that true? And is that what might be the future in this space?
I'll make one comment to drive this point home. I think for anyone interested in the future of the Sportiverse or the Metaverse, monitor gaming. It is right under our nose as a space where the future of physical and digital experiences are going to be invented.
If I can chime in on that as well, Ben, I think picking up on your thoughts, this really goes to the heart of how we see sport and its authenticity as an activity. or as a product, if you like. One thing we've seen in recent years around sports commercialization is a massive increase in content, largely, or at least partly, because it's gone through a fragmentation. But also at the bottom end, there's been a kind of decentralization or a democratization of sports activity, opening up through technology new kinds of sports and new experiences. So here we see in your example, Mum, of the drone racing, of a whole new body of content that no one ever anticipated before just a few years ago. And yet it's created an extreme form of content. So I think we're looking at now with the Metaverse as the extreme example of this, or the Sportiverse. We're seeing the potential for sport to fracture into different forms where its authenticity might be challenged, reframed, or completely reinvented. And, I come back to some of the technological thoughts around what's known as digital twinning, which is basically where you're trying to create a kind of digital facsimile, a model or a simulation of a real counterpart. But in this sort of experience, when we're talking in the Sportiverse, we're really talking about an opportunity for the twin to be another real asset, because it could be unique in its own way. I mean, think about how sport would be expressed if you're inventing a sport from its bottom up, not dissimilar to drone racing. You might modify the game engine to magnify the best, most compelling features of sport. You'd increase its unpredictability at key moments. You'd magnify the aspects of sport that make it most interesting and decisive for fans. And, at the same time, you'll get purists that will cry that it's not authentic. But at the same time, we don't have really a history of being all that bothered about suspending our disbelief in other entertainment contexts. So I think there's going to be an interesting relationship about what's authentic and what will transform our views. And then what will become the new form of sport, or the new forms of sport. There's the opportunity for it simply to be a greater access point for mainstream sport. But then there's also this kind of remarkable and unscripted reality, which Ben's described, that where there could be just an immense amount of new content, much of which you're creating yourself. So there's a user-generated life cycle in all of this. And you have to ask the question, to what extent does the armchair sport fan become the sport performer as well? And so, we've talked for a long time about sport fans creating and consuming their own content, but this takes it to another level again, where their content is also a physical experience, which can be communicated, commodified, on-sold, and experienced by anyone, anywhere in the world, or participated in. I think that's going to be the real challenge for sport. But this is why I think of it as a parallel universe. But what we mustn't get too carried away about, and I think Ben's also sort of suggested that it isn't yet in focus, and it can be anything, and exactly how it manifests is unclear. I keep thinking about broadcasting, for example, which, it wasn't that long ago we thought sport broadcasting would probably consolidate around a few major players. The opposite's happened, or at least my predictions were completely inaccurate. It went in the other directions. We've completely fragmented because the ownership has become more decentralized, and there's been more emergent content. I think we're going to see that in this potential Sportiverse. So Zuckerberg's concept of one metaverse is probably deeply flawed from the beginning. We're going to see a multiplicity of multiverses, but that could also mean a multiplicity of potential experiences and opportunities. The catch is, like all of these things, it will probably exclude most of us.
It's fascinating insights you're giving there. And one of the things you talked about was that immersiveness of spectators into performance. And there's a couple of things that I started thinking about there, linked to performance, and we can link fans and everything back to it. But, will the metaverse be there as well to enhance performance and potentially scout performance? So a couple of examples. One, we have on campus at Loughborough right now, we have a company called AI Scout. and they've got their big mobile caravan that is basically looks like the Matrix inside it. And they're testing lots of the athletes at Loughborough, and will be using AI and data to look at performance. And I'm presuming to potentially scout players and athletes for their potential performance, which, you know, is a game changer around the world for different elements. And it could also be kind of cross sport, because we know in this country that we have a bit of an issue with a lot of people wanting to play football and then getting released from clubs. And I know 2012 Olympics, we had people who had been released from football clubs, and many years before 2012, we started scouting different people who'd been released. I know there was a former professional goalkeeper who became a handball player as an example. So these kind of systems that could help scout players, but it could also be those own armchair people that are potentially being tested. I think another example I was thinking of as well, again, when I was at university, I was at Liverpool John Moores, and they, motor skill wise, they had a motor skill thing, which was a massive screen, and they played football matches, and you could watch the video, and you had to try and predict what the next pass was and what happened from the game. And I remember being told, and this is 20 years ago, so I'll be slightly wrong, so apologies to the lecturer who it was at the time, but we were told that Everton had a football genius in their academy, and they wouldn't tell us who this person was. But they basically said that this person could predict football moves up to something like 7 moves in advance, which was the same as Kasparovich, the chess player. And they're like, this guy is a football genius. He's going to be unbelievable. Months later, Wayne Rooney appeared on the scene. And I just found it fascinating that they had kind of, you know, people knew about Rooney when he was younger, but I'm pretty sure that's who they were talking about. But obviously that was kind of a 2D, not so immersive. And in football, you've obviously got perception and kind of, you know, being able to visualize and things. Whether things have moved forward in that motor skill space, I presume they have. But all those pieces, to me, are really interesting from a fan's perspective who may not have been around these professional environments before, and therefore might be able to sit in what is training like. What is it like to take a penalty in front of 80,000 people and miss? Can you still perform as you normally would under more pressure? And could we have that immersive environment? I just found it really fascinating from what you're saying. And that's probably my thoughts being thrown around in what this could mean. I'm not sure if any of that made any sense to any of you, but I was bringing that forward towards kind of the physical relationship and how sport may well be consumed by us, and what kind of feelings we might get as fans, or, as I just brought in there, potential future performers. Does any of that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you're bringing up, we've been talking a lot about the implications of metaverse-related technologies on the fan experience and the business of sports. You're also bringing up what are the implications on the performance side. And you highlighted at least a couple there that I think are interesting. One is in talent discovery. And in the pre-social media era, if you're a kid trying to make it to the pros, or in the US trying to get a college scholarship, you would get all of your plays from high school and put them on a VHS tape and send them around to different schools. Now in the social media era, you cut your YouTube highlight or put it up on Instagram to get noticed. You can imagine in more immersive digital environments how you as an athlete might be able to demonstrate the breadth of your skills much more effectively than even just showing highlights. So I think that can be an opportunity for not only athletes, but also on the team side to discover talent. The second implication that you brought up, Martin, from a sport performance standpoint, is in training and development. And as you may know, there's a popular term within the National Basketball Association of load management, which is basically the concept of, for our best star players, let's make sure that they are at their healthiest, both mentally and physically, for the games that matter most. And you can imagine that as training technologies and experiences evolve in metaverse type contexts, that players can work on their cognitive decision-making skills and exploring various game plans against opponents in digital context in a way that doesn't require any physical exertion or no injury risk. So I think that also is an interesting potential implication of these technologies, the ability for talent to develop mentally and strategically without any wear and tear on the body.
Martin, I think we've already seen the power of analytics and big data as it applies to sport. And Ben's picked up on some of the training implications, and you've noted some of the opportunities for talent identification as well. I think it will go a lot further than that. I can see a time when it's not just about identifying the best athletes and managing them appropriately through some sort of talent identification phase. I suspect that a lot of those athletes will be able to participate in metaverse leagues, which will be feeder structures into the real ones. Think of the minor leagues, think of the lower leagues in English football. But I think we've got to think carefully about where the bleed is between the two and where the commodification of one can lead to the other. I mean, for an example that comes out of Ben's thinking is that if you've got an athlete that has no severe physical impediment as a consequence of playing in the metaverse or training in the metaverse, well, they can play as much as you want. So instead of putting them on the pitch or on the court once a week, they can play 3 times a day if you like. And after a while, you don't even need the human. You can just modify an AI with predictive analytics and generative AI to display a kind of player's technique. So I think that we can keep pushing the boundaries on these things, but it is clear to me that there is an immense opportunity for physical training at the elite level, and also at the participation and health and fitness level, and just getting people active. But I can also see a kind of connection to futuristic technologies that might enable physical and mental enhancements for athletes. Whether these are advanced exoskeleton style wearables, neuro enhancement devices, maybe even some kind of other physical modifications that can allow us to more seamlessly integrate with the Sportiverse, as well as participate in the real, what we might have once called real sport. But of course, I've already challenged what real sport might end up being in a few years.
And that's exciting. I think there's going to be some really interesting debates that fans and sports organizations will have about technology and how much technology is too much. I'm even thinking about, let's just imagine that a sport could be played with perfect refereeing, so that there are no complaints after the match or after the game. Every single call was 100% correct. I think fans are going to have to ask themselves whether that's a world of sport that they want to engage in. Perhaps, right?
But
I don't know.
That is something that if you can invent that in professional football and the fans accept it, then that would, I think half of it is actually arguing about what the rules are, because I don't think most of us actually know. But it's a really interesting idea, and I still think players would argue anyway in football. I'm talking, but that's an amazing idea. Really is.
I think one of the critical issues for us is what's the edge of the envelope that the sport fan will accept. You can conceive that someone's ultimately, and we're already doing it in gameplay effectively, but basically creating an AI engine that puts 5 LeBron Jameses against another 5 LeBron Jameses on the court. Is that going to be boring? Is that really what we want? Where's the sense of emergence and unpredictability that goes along with what we consider to be authentic sport? Or can we, in fact, does that not matter? Are we ultimately going to be seduced by the engines which compel us to experience the best parts of sport that we've always loved. I mean, are we going to fall in love with sport properties that are entirely created in a virtual environment and that are literally invented, developed, or constructed around AI or other aspects that have no original basis in reality? What's going to be the limit to which we draw the line?
I don't think we'll ever know. I think that we might not know until we get there, or if we get there.
Yes. That's why I think it's going to be, we will push the envelope until we get to the point where we know where the boundaries are.
No, definitely. And I think, what we've talked through, I think gives our listeners a real good idea of your guys thinking of where the metaverse may be at the moment, where it might go. But I know from all our areas of work, one of the main things to talk about really now is the business model around this. So how does this fit into sport? And how, I know many people listening about sport, are often concerned about the monetization of sport, but it is the reality. So how do you think sports are going to monetize the metaverse?
I think first and foremost, metaverse technologies can represent new revenue streams, whether that be through digital products and services, whether that be through virtual merchandise. I think that there are pretty easy to imagine extensions of what fans pay for now in the physical world and what they might pay for in a more digital world. I think what is interesting to me is that these sports properties are going to have the opportunity to build direct-to-consumer businesses in a way that they haven't been able to do before the metaverse environment. By that I mean, you can imagine sports properties personalizing a set of digital products, services, and experiences to fans. So let's say you only want to attend one game and you want to attend that game virtually. And let's say you want both a digital version of a hat and a physical version of a hat. And let's say you are interested in hearing advertisements from only 2 or 3 insurance companies. I think what happens in this very digital world is that we see more bundling of products, services, and experiences, and we see more personalization in a way that we haven't seen before. That, to me, is where I think we are headed, in addition to some of the incremental new revenue opportunities that might be available right out of the gate.
Completely agree with everything Ben's observed. There's clearly going to be more of the same, isn't there, in terms of more product and more service. We're moving towards greater opportunities to digitize sponsorship. There's more content to broadcast. I think clearly there are new virtual spaces to populate with fans who hitherto have been unavailable or haven't had the opportunity to attend existing experiences. It's the call your cousin, let's meet at Madison Square Garden for the game, and we'll sit next to each other. So there's shared experiences as well. There's peer-to-peer, fan-to-fan, consumer-to-consumer opportunities. And that, of course, allows sponsors and others to get close to fans and to provide their own products and services, some of which might be digitized, through tokenized assets, digital currencies. We know that crypto is the biggest, has shown the biggest increase in sponsorship in sport across the board of any area or any sector. So we'll see more shared experiences. There'll be a gamified element to it, no doubt, where we can participate in games, and that of course can be monetized. And of course, there is an enhancement of the gaming experience in general just by adding more spectators, amplifying the experience. I think there's also a nascent but massive potential for the digital human to come in. So what is this, the AI? And we're already seeing this, in the way AI is interacting with us. It might simply be at the moment through chatbots and through customer service, but we'll start to see the integration, I think, of what we will interpret as consumers as digital humans, and that might be on the court, or it might also be through service provision. I think the other thing that we'll see massively commodified, and there'll be a huge business model behind it, will be underpinned by the huge advances we're seeing at the moment in spatial computing. So basically, this digital twinning, creating new worlds. And I know real estate companies are already looking at how they can take ownership of some of that space. What an opportunity. You create a digital environment and then you own it and sell it. And that's effectively digitizing and commercializing a bunch of new space that can also attract sponsors, and you can host sport. It could be a user experiences, it could be for shared experience, it could be for gaming. So I see that as being one of the greatest potential areas that goes beyond what sports business model is presently doing. And beyond that, of course, it will be more of the same. I think undoubtedly more content, be more fragmented, it'll be more customized, more packaged, and more available.
It does give a wealth of opportunities for fans and sponsors alike to be immersed within sport and new potential sport. I think so far you've covered what the metaverse is and the potential for both fans and athletes. But I've probably got one main final question around the potential problems, because from my perspective, it seems as if the society, the internet in itself, came too soon for us, and we didn't really know what was going on. And we've spent a lot of time over the past 20 years or so battling against some of the problems that are out there with the internet itself. Do you think there's going to be issues with the metaverse, and how do you think we could control that, knowing that we know the internet was a problem? Do you think we can get the control mechanisms in there before the problems happen, or do you think we're going to see the problems and have to sort them out?
Look, I think if we thought we had issues with data privacy in the social media era, if we move to a more immersive, unscripted, interactive era with metaverse environments, those data problems, privacy problems are going to be even magnified more than we could ever believe. And I do think that we have an opportunity in the way that we design these environments to hopefully keep user and data privacy at the forefront, perhaps in a way that we didn't do when social media platforms were built at the beginning.
Well, no, I see a couple of major issues and challenges coming up with the metaverse. I think there's a terrifying possibility of all kinds of governance issues, including privacy, even though I'd note that the promise of blockchain is for greater privacy. So those developing the metaverse point to that kind of technology as a possibility for securing sensitive information. At the same time, we've heard that before, and it's not entirely clear exactly how blockchain is going to be integrated, given the problems of interoperability, different technologies that are necessary in order for the metaverse to even work. So how that's going to move across scale, format, type, form, different developers, different platforms, different games, different gaming systems, currencies, technologies, all of those things are going to be so immensely problematic, I suspect, that its oversight from a governance viewpoint is going to be enormously problematic. And from a sporting viewpoint, I think it's inevitable that the metaverse will be to sport, what the internet was to the truth. It's going to blow things out of the water. And along with that is going to go a whole suite of problems around contractual agreements, determining jurisdiction, who owns what, and which is why I suspect that any kind of regulatory environment is almost impossible to sustain. And my other major concern is that although the metaverse promises to improve people's experiences, fans' engagement, maybe even people's livelihoods and their physical circumstances and health, it's almost certainly going to exclude most people on the planet simply by nature of the technology required, the costs and accessibility. So in the end, one of my fears will be that it will increase a divergence in wealth and opportunity.
That's really interesting. The equality piece you've added at the end there is something I'm sure we could dig loads into, but we've not really got time. It's interesting what you talked about there with the governance and regulation side of things, because we talked at the start about evolution or radical revolution, and things like ChatGPT. To those of us who are not really in the know, it just seemed to appear from nowhere and it was brilliant. But those of you who are in the know, they've been working on this for a long time. So it'd be interesting to see whether they start drip feeding more of this metaverse and it evolves, or whether things are kept in the background and they throw something radical and it really kind of leaps forward. And I think that's something we'll see coming in the future. Like we said, we've kind of run out of time, but I think we've covered most of this stuff. I really enjoyed talking to you both. You've answered that simple, complex question of what is the metaverse. You've given us loads of different examples of how sport could evolve in the future, different experiences for fans, different experiences potentially for players, and the potential prospects of the metaverse. And you've also added details of how it might be monetized, rightly or wrongly. That is a situation that sport is in. And you've captured that word that we've talked about, the metaverse, but indeed, we're talking now about the Sportiverse and how it could be the future of sport. So from me, massive thank you. Really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll talk soon and we'll see what happens in the next few years.
Been a pleasure. Thank you, Martin. Thank you, Ben.
Likewise. Thank you both. Been a ton of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Experts in Sport podcast. If you'd like to get in touch, then please contact me, Martin Foster, at m.foster@loughborough.ac.uk. Thanks for listening. See you next time.